for people that don't know who you are, William, which is probably very few, tell us a little bit about yourself and what made you write your monumental book, The Gods of Eden.
Well, yeah, people ask me about my background. I don't really belong to any particular religious group or philosophy. I was a sociology student in college, and so I have always had this interest in social dynamics, social reform, and kind of understanding why society works the way it does. And most people who get involved in sociology and political science, of course, our main concern is really about like war and strife and disunity, and what are the causes and what can we do to try to prevent that. So I really started The Gods of Eden with the idea, I didn't even have UFOs in mind when I wrote it. I was really looking for the basically war as profit was really what I was looking at, like who actually financially profits from war. That's not a new idea. We talk about it all the time today. But there are two ways you can profit from war. You can profit financially. You can also profit politically. And I was kind of getting more interested in the political aspect of it. As a sociology student, one of our books that we read was Machiavelli's The Prince. The Prince is a classic in literature, and it talks about how you can manipulate war as a way to control a population. And the manipulator then stays hidden and basically gets two sides to fight a war against each other as a way to kind of keep them subjugated. And so the Prince and Machiavelli, the man who wrote it, was a big influence on my thinking and on the thinking, believe it or not, of a lot of college students. Conspiracy theory is not quite as marginal as some people make it out to be. It's actually fairly mainstream, at least at that level when you read books like that. So anyway, I got interested in that, and that led then to, I started looking at all these different wars, and then it kept coming up, well, why do people fight these wars? Like some of it boils down to religion, and why nobody really benefits if you're just some guy living and don't have a lot of money, and you go out and fight a war. Well, there's everything to lose. You could lose your life. There's really no real motivation to go fight it, except for you can radicalize people. And as soon as you radicalize them, you can get them to fight and kill and be killed, all that you want. And then I looked at the religious philosophies that cause this in people and what kind of particular religious philosophy causes it. And it tends to be this kind of apocalyptic, good versus evil type of religion that will inflame people to go to war most commonly. Then I looked at, okay, what are the origins of these religions, of this particular brand of religion, and then you get to God and angels and all their belief systems. That then led me to the ancient astronaut literature. Mostly Zecharia Sitchin, I would say probably he was the biggest influence on my thinking for this book, and I owe a big debt to his work because he got into the creation stories. He gave it that UFO slant, the ancient astronaut slant, but he really delved into the creation stories from ancient Sumeria, where they talked about how the human race was created to be basically a slave race or a servant race. And then when you look at those creation stories, they say that these gods had a system for keeping people disunited. And that was one of their objectives, to keep people ignorant and to keep them disunited. And out of these, and they had particular types of religion back then and particular types of secret societies that they started that then became the source of these kinds of teachings that kept people disunited. So anyway, I kind of went back in history, but then after I reached that point, I then worked my way back up to the present to see if these same types of organizations and these same types of phenomena kept going, because the UFO itself has been a constant. It's been a constant for thousands of years, and so have these other aspects of the UFO phenomenon also been a constant, and surprisingly they were. And that's really how I came up with the theory that that program or that plan that was described in the ancient creation stories has actually been in effect all the way up to the present. All that happened was that the UFO or the ETs or whatever you want to call them, they simply disappeared a little bit into the background, but their influence did not stop. It just continued all the way to the modern day.
for people that are just now tuning in, we're talking with William Bramley. He is the author of The Gods of Eden. It's a very fascinating book. It was written in the early 90s, and I suggest you buy it if you haven't read it already. And on the back of the book, it says, human history is a seemingly endless succession of bloody conflicts and devastating turmoil. Yet, inexplicably, in the light of astonishing intellectual and technological advancement, man's progress has been halted in one crucial area. He still indulges the primitive beast within and makes war upon his neighbors. And on the front, it says, the chilling truth about extraterrestrial infiltration and the conspiracy to keep mankind in chains. And then it says, the gods of Eden. And there looks like a forest with a UFO in it. I'm guessing that's Eden. But why is there a UFO in Eden? Well, what kind of symbolism are you trying to say about the book, William?
Well, Eden is actually a symbolic story. Adam and Eve are actually two symbols to represent the first humans or the earliest humans. And Eden was, by all scholarship, was actually in Mesopotamia, in the regions of Samaria and around there. And so that's where the creation story started. So it's a little bit of a play on words. When I say the gods of Eden, I'm really kind of saying the gods of Samaria, okay? But yeah, Samaria became Eden in the Bible, and I do talk about how the ancient creation stories from Samaria actually were the basis for the biblical creation stories, including Adam and Eve, the Tower of Babel, which is an important story in my context, and some of those other very early stories actually came from Samaria.
Okay, and yeah, it's really fascinating the way this is a really cool looking book, the one I have. I think there's actually two different types of books, I believe, of the Gods of Eden, and the one that I have is the one with the forest and the UFO in the center of it.
Yeah, that's the paperback edition that came out from Avon. I think they did a beautiful job on the cover. I love the cover.
Oh, yes, they did.
Yeah, they really did.
Really good. And how far back are we looking at here when the extraterrestrials, or you say it in your book, because you call them the Custodians, as you call them, and how far back are we looking here?
You know, there's a lot of dispute on that. I don't really take a position on it because, you know, I've seen things like, forbidden archaeology where there's speculation that this may go back millions of years. I think Sitchin puts it back hundreds of thousands of years. But then we have also a time when there was a sudden jump from Neanderthal to modern Homo sapiens, and that was much more recent. That was only like 10 to 30,000 years ago. My speculation, and again, it's only a theory, it's a speculation, but my speculation is that is the jump, or that's when the intervention happened, that there was some kind of intervention, which they talk about in the Sumerian stories, is that the gods came down, they created Homo sapiens, modern Homo sapiens. My speculation, it was that jump 10 to 30,000 years ago that they were talking about, but that there were many variations of Homo sapiens going back even earlier. So, there are differences of opinion on that. I really don't know. I don't really speculate too much about that in my book. And even today, I really don't have a strong opinion about that. It could very well go back much further. My concern was, how does this affect us today, and how has this impacted history from the time that we have our written documents, like our writings, the clay tablets from Samaria, they go back to 3,000-4,000 BC approximately, up to the modern. Then, of course, we have a fairly consistent history up to the modern day, and that's the history that I was looking at. I didn't try to go back any further than that, although a lot of that writing is very interesting. I mean, there's a lot of very interesting, like ancient batteries found in sediment that goes back, I don't know how long ago, Things like that are fascinating to me, but it's not really part of what I'm trying to talk about in my book. And to be honest with you, I haven't really read enough on these other things to really form an opinion to tell you about that.
Well, a lot of other famous alternative researchers out there, big names out there, they look at your book as a monumental piece in help shaping their own research. Of course, Michael Desarian, he's been on the show, and your book is one of the ones that has helped shape his research. And whenever you wrote this book, did you intend for it to happen like that? Like, well, what were you trying to do? You just trying to write a history book, like more of a history book, or what? Because like this book has helped shape the alternative field in so many ways.
I honestly thought nobody was ever going to read my book. I was pretty young. I started the book, I was in my 20s, I think. I was going to originally leave out the whole UFO part of it. I thought I had enough on just the armaments manufacturers and the banks and all that, the profit from war. And I thought, well, this UFO stuff, even though I believed in it and I thought it was really fascinating, I was worried that I would just sort of get away from really what I was trying to accomplish, and that is like, hey, let's deprofitize war. Let's take the profit out of war. Let's recognize when there's a Machiavellian influence so that we don't kind of go along with it. That was really my whole goal of researching the book. But what happened was that, I researched a period of history during the Black Death when some of these kinds of religious movements were kind of coming along. But then during the Black Death era, there were a lot of UFO reports, and they were just shocking reports. I'd never seen them in any UFO book, and I'd read by that time quite a few UFO books about ancient astronauts. I'd never seen anybody who found these Black Death reports, and there were a lot of them shocking because they talked about these bright lights spraying gas, and the gas is what caused people to die and contract the plague and all of that. And, and that kind of haunted me, and I thought, well, I really need to put the UFOs in there. Mm-hmm. And I present it as a theory, and I'm very careful to say it's a theory. Even though the cover says a chilling truth, I say inside the book, a theory. But that's really what got me to put that in there. And the first edition, I had to, I sent it around to a couple of publishers, and of course I got the rejections. I think they thought it was just too crazy. And I had to self-publish the very first hardcover edition, and it was a very, very small printing. And I figured, well, I'm just going to have this garage full of books that I'm going to have to send out to libraries and get rid of. But it took off. I was really surprised at how it resonated with people. And then Avon Books, which is the paperback publisher, I think they liked it because I referenced Sitchin so much. And they published Sitchin. They published all of his paperbacks. So I think they saw this as sort of a progeny. And believe it or not, the editor liked the theory, and so it's been out for quite a few years now through them. They still publish it today, which is kind of amazing to me. And it's also amazing to me that the theory is held up. I'm a very left-brained person in a sense, in that, I kind of go with my intellect rather than just feeling, and people criticize me for that sometimes. But the theory has actually been holding up. I thought it was going to be disproven, probably, especially because it came out right around when the Cold War was ending. The Berlin Wall was coming down, and it just seemed like we were headed for a world of peace. And I thought, well, okay, that's, first of all, I was very happy, but then I thought, okay, well, that kind of disproves the gods of Eden. But one thing I told an audience back at that time was that I noticed that I forgot where the war was, and not that I'm some great seer, I don't have a crystal ball, but I noticed that there was a war going on in Europe. Maybe it was Bosnia, but don't quote me on that, I forgot. But it was basically, there were some Islamists that were fighting. And I thought, and I still have a recording where I told the audience, if the gods of Eden is true, and if it's still in effect, the program that I kind of outline here, what we're going to see is we're going to see Islam arise as the next faction to replace communism, to breed strife globally. And unfortunately, that came true. That was one of the things that after writing the Gods of Eden, you could kind of predict. Now, of course, people say, well, that's not the reason why Islam arose. There are other reasons for it. But anyway, it did fit the pattern of the Gods of Eden, and in that sense, it has continued to hold up, because Islam is one of the apocalyptic religions that I talk about in Gods of Eden. that has contributed to sort of like this division amongst people on religious grounds, and that does breed radicalism based upon these sort of apocalyptic ideas. It fit the pattern. And then some ancient astronauts believe that there's theorists believe that there's an ancient astronaut connection to the foundation of Islam with Muhammad in the cave, that those could have been kind of ETs that came to him rather than what he called spirits or the jinn. So anyway, that's I kind of went around in circles there. I hope I answered your question, but I really
you did.
Yeah, and I really appreciate it. I'm so flattered by all the people who have really found the Gods of Eden to be important to them, and that it's inspired them to continue working. I got exhausted after writing the Gods of Eden. I kind of made a vow, no more of this. And I did say at the end of the book, I hope other people sort of pick up on it and write the sequels to it, because I'm a little bit too exhausted to do that.
And they have too. They really have this. Just like I said, it has shaped the alternative research, and because it has boomed in the 90s, and you wrote it like in the early 90s. And for people that are just now tuning in, we're speaking with William Bramley. Also go to YouTube and check out, if you haven't saw it on TV, he's in the Ancient Aliens series. I believe it's the Visitation episode that he has a lot of speaking time in. So if you just go to YouTube, type in Ancient Aliens Visitation episode, and I believe he's in that one. But this quote, I guess, is on the back of your book. It's kind of leading to the next question that I have. On the back it says, Earth millions of years ago to spread the poison of hatred, war, and catastrophe. And in your opinion, how did humans get here on this planet? Are we the natural evolution of Earth, or did some group of extraterrestrials place us here long ago?
That's a really good question. I kind of believe in the intervention theory, that there was, a human race, or at least some version of it already. I love the work of Charles Fort. I'm not sure, you've probably heard of him. Charles Fort was also an inspiration to me. And I quote him in one of the very earliest chapters. He wrote like almost 100 years ago, and it's just amazing how far-sighted he was. He just wrote these books on these unusual phenomena. He just collected stories about weird things, like frogs falling out of the sky, and he kind of created this chronology. But of course, he also included reports of the lights in the sky and all the things that we call UFOs today. And that was before what we call the modern UFO era, which began in like 1947. But anyway, Charles Fort said something very amazing in a book that he titled Book of the Damned. And he said, I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, by the way. He said, I think we're property. I think somebody explored here, wafted here, came here, left here in times gone by, and that we are here and have some mysterious purpose, that basically that he said that somebody owns us, all others warned off. Charles Fort was very popular back in his day. He inspired a lot of the science fiction writers back in his day. There's a whole magazine with his name on it called, I think, the Fortean Times. It's published in England. You can still get it. So I love that, because I really feel he encapsulated the situation probably pretty well based on the evidence that I came up with. But when did all that happen, and what was the seeding process? Gosh, you go like to other creation stories, like the Popol Vuh, which is the South American creation story. They talk about a lot of experimentation in a very crude, kind of funny way. I mean, it is primarily mythology. I'm not saying the Popol Vuh is like an accurate telling of history by any means. It's a mythological telling of history, but it's somewhat similar to what you get out of the Bible. That there was experimentation being done. That there was some kind of engineering, some kind of effort to create a race that could perform toil, that could perform labor. And that was what the basis of the Sumerian creation stories were, kind of the genetic manipulation of maybe people who were already here, but creating a hybrid, so to speak, that could perform the labor that these custodial gods wanted done. all the way up to building the pyramids, and earlier than that, they were mostly involved in mining, getting minerals and so forth. And the Sumerian creation stories are very funny about that, because they talk about how the actual ETs, which they call the gods, a lot of them had to do that labor, and they were complaining and griping, and why do we have to do all this hard labor? And so the leaders said, okay, we're going to go ahead and create this race to kind of take the burden off your back. And so there was this genetic manipulation to create modern Homo sapiens. And then as part of that, then you have these control measures, like the Machiavellian control measures and so forth. But exactly the timing and where, gosh, your guess is as good as mine, and probably you have a better guess than I do if you've read more of the literature than I have. But I'm sure that a lot of people have different opinions, and Sitchin has a different opinion than other people too. So it's just fascinating to look at them, and I'm content to live with uncertainty about these things. I enjoy a mystery. So even though there's a mystery about some of these, I kind of enjoy that the mystery's there. It's something to try to solve and to keep looking into and finding the answers to.
We have a few people in the chat room that have talked about God and religion, and they want me to ask you a little bit about religion, but that's kind of blank. They didn't really ask a really good question, but I did see something in your book here. It's on the first page. It has a list of questions, 5 questions, and one of them is, do the world's major religions teach the truth, or have they all been corrupted?
Well, first of all, I don't believe there's any religion on earth, new or old, that has all of what we might call the truth. I think you're going to find scattered throughout all the religions is some element of it. People capture it here and there, and so you have to really do a lot of looking. At least that's my opinion. And so I would say, you're going to find some, for example, in Christianity, you're going to find some, I think, good things in there. Same thing in Islam, and same thing in Judaism and the Old Testament and some of their other traditions. And even some of the, even in the New Age and so forth, you're going to find a lot of nuggets of, I think, of valid spiritual teachings. But you really have to kind of go through and pull out those nuggets. My concern is that there's a particular type of religious teaching, and what I call the militant apocalyptic teaching, is the channel through which most of the mischief has been done and continues to be done. So to the extent that you find those kinds of teachings in all these different religions, whether it's in Islam, whether it's in Christianity, wherever you find that, that's where the problem comes in. And I think that's where this influence comes through to create the wars. So, I say don't be afraid of religion. I mean, I enjoy going to midnight mass on Christmas Eve or before Christmas at Catholic churches just because I enjoy it. I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in the theology. But, I find that it's just enjoyable and that they all have something positive. But in terms of what to believe spiritually, I don't think we have all the answers as a race. And I'm kind of interested, like a lot of people are now, about things like quantum physics and the philosophical implications of that. And, frankly, I think science is maybe the next step that's going to take us maybe to the kinds of answers that we are looking for in religion, or at least there might be some more unity between religion and science coming up. Right now there's still a division, but I see some hope there too. So that's kind of where I'm looking right now for answers coming along. But I don't think we have them all yet at this point.
Yeah. Whenever I get your other book, Jesus Goes to Hollywood, I'm going to get you back on and we'll have more of a religious discussion here. But, of course, today's show is about your first book, The Gods of Eden. But religion is according to it, because religion is as you say, I'm paraphrasing in your book, is the root of all evil and the root of all the way the world is today. Because a lot of people, as people say, many researchers and yourself, religion does write history. But where does the evil side of humanity come from, though? Like, what is it? Is it genetically implanted in us, or do we have the same genes as the ETs, and As it says in Genesis, let us create man in our own image and after our likeness. Where does the evil come from in humanity?
Well, that's a great question. We could talk another hour on that, but it's a question that I like thinking about myself. So I'm glad you asked the question. I kind of focused on one place where evil comes from, and that comes from somebody having an agenda that's destructive and knowing how to manipulate other people into carrying out that agenda. Now, why do people carry it out? Now we're getting down to human psychology. I mean, why does anybody go pick up a gun and go shoot somebody or go join an army and go fight somebody, To me, when you really look at it, it's so stupid. It's such an idiotic thing for anybody to be doing. And I know I'm going to get a lot of heat for saying this because they say, well, what about the enemies? You got to fight them and blah, blah, blah. I'm talking collectively now. I'm talking about as a collective species, why do we do this? We're all capable of violence, and there are certain triggers that can trigger that in anybody, and then usually it's the idea of protecting something really important. Like, I think everybody would agree that, if somebody came into the house with guns and threatened to shoot our family, we would have no trouble picking up a gun and shooting them back and killing them. And that's normal. Yeah, and I totally agree. That's a normal, healthy response to that situation. And you should do that if that happens. On the other hand, wars take planning, they take propaganda, they take time to get people gathered together and to go out and do them. It's not like a spontaneous reaction in most cases to an attack. Sometimes it is, but it very rarely is. You almost always find wars being planned well in advance. And so, but what causes people to do that? What you do is you instill this protection mode. For example, I have to fight for my country to defend my country. There's nothing wrong with that. Per se. I mean, if somebody suddenly crossed the ocean right this minute while we're talking on the phone and started to invade us, let's pick up the guns and shoot back if they start shooting at us. But that's different than kind of rallying people to say, okay, next week we're going to go ahead and blow up something because we want to, because we have a religious cause. And there, you can trigger people into believing in that they have to save something important, kind of in an abstract, like I have to fight for God. I have to preserve something religious or spiritual that's being threatened by those people over there. And the only way I can protect or preserve this important spiritual thing to me is by killing the people over on the other side, because they are the enemies. They are the sons of Satan, or whatever you want to call it. And this has been going on for thousands of years. That's one of the main ways that we do it. So it's that ability to, trigger that in people and to inflame people that way is what I think contributes and is the biggest cause of war. And now you asked me earlier, well, is religion a force for good or evil? I think it's a force for both because I think there's enough evidence to suggest a spiritual reality too. That I've read a lot of these near-death studies, studies on reincarnation, all of these. So my left brain outlook says, there's some reality to this. And because there's a reality to this underlying a lot of the craziness sometimes you see in religions, I think that's what triggers it. But we're ignorant of what that true reality is. Even today, like I said, I don't think anybody has the answer to it all. So I think that combination makes us prone, and when I say us, of course I'm not talking about everybody. There are a lot of people who you couldn't inspire them to pick up a gun for religious reasons for anything, and I'm one of them. You could never get me to fight for any religion. Mm-hmm. But some people you can, and that's the issue that I see. So it's the capability, and then you have a small minority, if you read psychology books on sociopathy or psychopathy, there is a small portion of the human population that is psychopathic, and it's not like the Hollywood Jason stabbing people with a knife kind of thing. It's more people who they just grew up, something happened, they just didn't develop a normal human conscience. And there's a good book called The Sociopath Next Door that I could recommend to people who are interested in that topic, and what that book talks about, just the general qualities, like, what makes a person sociopathic. And when you get people like that in government, in positions of power, they will have no trouble leading other people into war. They'll have no trouble manipulating people that way because they don't have the conscience that bothers them to do that. And so when you have a government, any country that's engaged in a lot of war, you're inevitably going to find personalities like that rising to high positions, because those are the kind of people who can keep doing it. They can keep sustaining it. Now, I'm not saying by any means that our generals and our soldiers are sociopaths by any stretch of the imagination, but you're going to find in government that those types of personalities will steer us more towards war than otherwise we would get involved with. So it's a combination. It's just the human psychology combined with my theory of also an external hidden influence and an external manipulation that uses that to be able to manipulate us into war. So anyway, that's kind of my very long-winded answer to your question.
Yeah. You said it very perfectly. Something that just I don't understand is that why and how were we created with this two-sided ego, I guess, or something that it's just I don't understand why there's two sides to everything, like good and evil, truth and lies, left and right, Republican and Democrat. I guess the root of all the world's problems, and you stated some of it in The Gods of Eden, but what type of event created this two-sided psychological problem that humanity has?
Well,
if you had to speculate, like, well, what's your best guess? What created this event that created this psychological problem that we have?
It's a problem. First of all, there's a survival mechanism that allows us to attack, to commit violence when something important is threatened. Okay, that is a normal response. But then you get the other side of it that really doesn't want that. We all in the United States, truly, nearly all of us, and in every country in the world, and even in the world of Islam, even in the world of Judaism, even in the world of Christianity, most people, they just want their TVs. They want to go out to movies. They want to have fun. They want to raise families. They want to create art. That's that other side to us. That side is fortunately more dominant, I think, than the destructive side, because I think most people, given a choice, like we're sitting here right now talking, if you had the choice now after this interview to go out to a movie with a spouse or a significant other or friends versus, okay, now I got to go out and I got to go to war with somebody down the block and start shooting and doing all of that. Yeah. There's some people who might choose that, right? Okay, kind of the red-blooded type, but most of us wouldn't. But we have the capability to do that. And so I think what's happened is culturally, generation by generation, through this manipulative process, through people getting profit out of it, whether it's social profit, political profit, or monetary profit, generation after generation, generation after generation, it's just become so embedded now in our culture to let that side of us come out, to keep manifesting that side, that it's more dominant than I think it otherwise would have been. I think left to our own devices, we would become peaceful actually very quickly. Because nobody would really want to bother, getting out into a fight and watching loved ones get killed and all of that. So that's my theory. I think it's just thousands of years of cultural acclimatation towards it, caused by this manipulation that brings it to the forefront. Anyway, that's probably what the Gods of Eden would say, or that would be the theory of that book.
What are these? The royalties of the world and the many elite families of the world. We know which there's 13 that many alternative researchers have stated that they believe that have controlled the world events of the past and the present. But are these same blood ties and these same bloodlines, whatever? Are they the same bloodlines that go back to the beginning, or as you state in the Gods of Eden?
Well, I do talk a little bit about that. I do talk a little bit about the bloodlines, the blue bloods, so to speak, and the belief that some people have who belong to some of these families that ultimately they go back to ETs basically. You get the blue bloods of India. They were actually, you see some of the old ancient texts from India where they actually have blue skin and all of that too. And these are the gods that were also said to be these extraterrestrial advanced race kind of people. They flew around in the Vimanas, they engaged in aerial combat, and sure, some of these then have blue skin, and they were said to be blue-blooded. And so when you get what they call the blue bloods today, I just find it almost amusing that we can trace it back actually to these figures in history that we now maybe identify in the ancient astronaut theory as being ETs. But certainly I think there's some importance there. But understand that the people who I call the king rats, I think, in my book I say that the people who are kind of profiting from this, and these are just the human beings who profit from war, these are the people who run the Halliburtons and all of that. I don't know that they are always necessarily connected by blood, some of them maybe, some of them not. It's more that they've achieved a position where they're kind of at the top of the slave heap, so to speak, the oppressed race. They're in many ways just as oppressed as we are, but they're just a little bit better off. And I like to cite, and in the book I did, there's an old movie called The King Rat. I think just King Rat. It was a famous movie, I think, from the 50s or the 60s. It was about a Japanese prisoner of war camp, and it was very interesting because the Japanese, of course, they controlled the whole camp. But what they allowed certain people to do, like certain prisoners, they kind of allowed them to kind of rise to the top of the prison population. They kind of got to be the rulers of the prisoners. They got to be a little bit wealthier, in terms of they'd had more cigarettes than other people, that have more eggs or whatever it is that was valuable to the prisoners. They got to have more of it. And it was tolerated by the actual people who kind of ruled it from the outside, which were the Japanese prison keepers. So I kind of make an analogy to that movie in my book, that I see something fairly similar to that, and that's kind of where I see those people. Yeah, they live better than the rest of us. They're more comfortable. They profit from it. But ultimately, their spiritual situation is just as bad as ours is. And in some ways worse even, because there are repercussions, I think, to hurting other people and doing damage to other people that kind of, I think, rebounds on us socially, psychologically, spiritually. So that tends to be a little bit more where I come from. And of course, you get people from all different groups, so you get all different religions, all different political backgrounds, who kind of fit that description of what I call the king rats. So I have a little bit of a different take, but not totally divergent. I mean, I do incorporate a little bit of that in there, but I go a little bit beyond that as well.
We have a caller that just called into the switchboard. Area code 7740, you're on the air with William Bramley. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hi, William. This is Mark from Ohio. How are you?
Yeah, hi, Mark. Thanks for calling.
I had a few quick questions. It sounds like you guys have covered some of this. It sounds like one of the things that you're saying is that there is a group that's kind of in charge of the world covertly that is manipulating the human race into war. If that is true, what is their purpose and who are these people?
That's still a puzzle to me, because what I did was I followed the creation stories up to the modern day, where it was the E.T. who was said in the old creation stories actually came here. They controlled the earth. They owned the earth. It was just one more possession of theirs. And, the human race became genetically engineered then to become this hybrid race to perform labor. Now, the time eventually came, though, when they didn't need that labor anymore. They were no longer mining minerals. In ancient Egypt, they were no longer said to be living in all of these different homes that people had to serve. They kind of just vanished into the background. But what intrigued me was that the same pattern continued, the same agenda that was expressed in the ancient stories has persisted through the same kinds of sources. I actually do not understand totally why that would be still happening, because it doesn't appear to be any tangible benefit, except, I looked into all the abduction research by Bud Hopkins did a great job, and there was another professor over at the University of Pennsylvania. He wrote The Threat, and they talk about what appears to be, and these are very good researchers. They've done a lot of regressions on people, and what they talked about is there's a pattern of genetic engineering that's still going on in the modern abduction phenomenon. That so many abductees, they have genetic material taken. Sometimes they're re-abducted and they're shown a baby, which is told to be theirs, but it's half alien and half human. Dr. Jacobs, I recommend his book to anybody who's interested in the abduction phenomenon. And so Dr. Jacobs's theory was that this is happening on a massive scale, that there is a large program going on. Now, I can't say for sure, but it's a fascinating thought, and that would be that there's still something of benefit to them in the genetic material that we have. There's still some value in keeping us in this state. It's no longer the gold or whatever it is they mined. It's now the genetic material. But what that is, I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine on that.
Well, thanks, William.
You have another question, Mark?
No, I'll go ahead and hang up, but I just want to thank both of you guys. Very interesting show tonight. Good evening.
All right, thank you, Mark. And if you have not got his book, The Gods of Eden, he explains a lot of your questions and a lot of other questions you may have very well. Like I said in the beginning of the show, The Gods of Eden has been a monumental piece for a lot of other researchers out there in shaping their own personal research. And you were speaking about blue bloods a while ago, William, and I don't know if you ever, of course I'm sure you thought about it, but did you know that, I'm kind of getting into David Icke a little bit, but reptilians, they're known to have cold blood or blue blood, and a lot of people say that that's where this blue blood terminology came from. It's because that many of the elite of the world, when they back in the ancient of days, used to be reptilians, and that's where they get this blue blood. I don't know if that has any truth to it at all, but it sure does make you think.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, and I think a lot of your listeners are going to be disappointed. I have some of David Icke's books. I've only read one of them, and that's the one about love, I think. Love is the only thing. I'm sorry, it was a few years ago, and that was more about quantum physics. I haven't read his other books. Shame on me, right? Just because I just have a whole huge pile of books that I just never have gotten to. So, the only thing I can say so I'm not going to, express an opinion about his theories. I feel that any writer, before I express an opinion about their work, I have to read their books first. But one thing I can say about the idea of a reptilian is that, in the UFO phenomenon itself, you have the little grays, you have the more very human-like, and then you have also basically people who look like reptiles. And that's been reported in modern UFO literature. Going back in history, when you look at some of the depictions of these ancient gods, you do see some like little statuettes and some depictions where some of them, but not most of them, but some of them do look like reptiles. So, whether they had blue blood and whether that's there's a DNA connection there, that I couldn't form an opinion about simply because I really haven't studied that and I haven't read some of the literature on that. So I apologize for that. I wish I could give you an opinion, but I, like I said, I feel like in honesty I shouldn't do that until I've read all the evidence first.
Exactly. We have about 9 minutes remaining, and another question that I pulled from your book is, explain to us what the role of secret societies in contemporary world events is. Like, what is their main agenda for the future for mankind? all these secret societies of the world, like let's say Freemasons, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers. Do they all have the same agenda on mind, or are they all working opposing each other towards their own separate agendas?
You got to look at it just group by group. Every group is going to have its own agenda. Sometimes they'll overlap, sometimes they won't. Sometimes the agendas will compete with each other, sometimes they will be aligned. What I tell people, and kind of what I pointed out at the end of the book, is that the role of these different organizations kind of change through time. For a while they will be very significant. For example, in the theory that I presented, Freemasonry was very significant for at least a couple of hundred years. Then it decreased in significance. The significance, I think, of Freemasonry actually decreased. It was no longer a source of war. And what you find, though, is one group keeps replacing another. Some groups they just go stale, or the members, they start believing the good things that the groups preach, and they actually start gravitating more to those good things rather than being inspired to do bad things. So I'm talking very simplistically. So what I say is look at the groups that are really obvious. For example, radical Islam, like I said, it has replaced communism. Communism I talk about in my book because it was very significant for a while, and it had the similar origins that I talk about. But now that's been replaced by and large. Now go look at radical Islam, look at the other groups, and start there, and then you're going to find, I haven't done the research, by the way, but the theory says that, for example, you find behind radical Islam, you find the Wahhabis. The Wahhabis are the fundamentalist sect based in Saudi Arabia. They were the ones who trained the fighters in Afghanistan long ago. They inspired bin Laden, and they were connected to a radical group called the Egyptian Brotherhood. Now, what you do, and the kind of research I think you want to do is, okay, you have that. It's an obvious source. Now find out who are the leaders of the Wahhabis, and then you find out, well, do any of them claim to be in contact with either angelic beings or any kind of weird entity that they claim is inspiring them? And it's hard to find out because it's a fairly closed society over there. You don't get a lot of literature. You don't get a lot of blogging from over there. But, the Gods of Eden, the theory says anyway, that you will find ultimately that kind of connection behind Wahhabism or very close to it, somewhat hidden, but it'll be there. Like I said, I'm not going to do that research because I'm exhausted. but if somebody
I don't blame you.
Yeah, but if somebody else has but you have to also be able to read the language too. There's not much literature. I mean, you can read about the Wahhabis on Wikipedia, kind of get an oversight of who started it and some of their general beliefs. But it's the weird part of it that you really want to find. It's always the weird part of the religions that you're looking for. For example, Nation of Islam, they have some good points to them. But they're also a separatist group. They actually want to see a separate black nation. Which I think is stupid because I think skin color is totally artificial. It's like the color of your car. I mean, it's that artificial to me. And so what? But it's still. But as soon as you find a group that's really stuck on that, then you have to wonder. But the Louis Farrakhan said that he was taken aboard a UFO. And it was in the Washington Post, and he talked about his UFO experience and how it inspired him for some of his beliefs. Most people said, oh, that's just ridiculous, it's just stupid and silly. Having written The Gods of Eden, I go, that opens my eyes. I say, well, okay, that's really interesting to me. Again, I haven't really dug into it because this all happened after The Gods of Eden came out. But that's the kind of thing to look for. Yeah, okay.
We have about 5 to 6 minutes remaining, and we have a question from the chat room. I should probably ask this earlier in the show when we was talking about it, but there's a question that I guess they've read your book, and in your book you haven't explained ISIS in your book, The Gods of Eden, and he or she is wanting to know, like, how do you identify with her? Well, what is your take on ISIS?
Oh boy, I'd have to really take a look at that again. ISIS was one of the ancient Egyptian gods that's associated with the ancient astronaut phenomenon. Now, ISIS is also the basis of a lot of mythology, including mythology that kind of crept into and became Christianity. So there's a very complicated relationship there. So I don't really have an opinion. For example, was ISIS a real entity? Was it one of the ETs that were living in Egypt? I'd say possibly, yeah. But I can't say that for sure. So, yeah, I would have to say, I'm sorry to the reader who called in, that I haven't studied the myths and the stories of ISIS really in a lot of detail. But it did come up in passing in my book. And also in Jesus Goes to Hollywood, I talk about the virgin birth story, which is connected to ISIS as well.
Okay, with the last few minutes remaining, what does the future hold in your opinion? Is the world going to fall, or is there going to be some sort of mass awakening amongst the people?
Well, it's a really interesting time, and boy, I could talk quite a bit on this because, right now we are actually experiencing, I put it on my website a little bit, you may have read it, we're actually in the 6th mass extinction. Right now, we have species disappearing very, very rapidly, and it's almost like life is shutting down right now, kind of gradually, and it's even starting to affect us a little bit because we know the honeybees. You probably know about that problem, and so this extinction of species is very widespread. It's starting to hit species that affect us, like the honeybees and the pollinators affect our food supply. It's almost as though we are at a point where if we don't kind of correct all of this, and if there is a manipulation going on, if they don't stop, they're going to push it too far. And it could actually happen within the next few generations because it's happening fairly rapidly right now. I don't want to be an alarmist, for example, with this whole ocean spill. To me, that set off a big alarm simply because the oceans, believe it or not, we depend on the oceans for a lot of our food, even for our oxygen. 80% of our oxygen comes from the ocean. I don't think that there's enough oil to kill off the oxygen production. But what I'm saying is, like, we're basically seeing a rapid shutdown. In terms of our general history. Usually when you go through mass extinctions, they take millions of years, to happen. Now we're talking about a mass extinction that we have started in that could just end by the end of this century, by within the lifetime of children who are being born right now. And so to me, it's sort of like, okay, if this is true, it needs to change. Otherwise, I think it will get pushed too far, and maybe pretty quickly at this point.